Hello everyone, this is Andrew. Welcome to Keen on America.
On July 4th, 2026, America will be 250 years old. An anniversary that will, no doubt, be greeted with a mixture of celebration, contemplation, and resignation. In Keen on America, Andrew talks not just about the American past and present, but also speculates on its future. What, Andrew asks, will be the 21st century fate of this now venerable American republic?
Hello, everybody. It's Monday, October the 20th, 2025. We usually do all our shows on Restream, but Restream's down today because Amazon Web Services has essentially brought the entire internet down, which is perhaps appropriate given my guest today, Tim Wu, who's always been a critic of what we might think of as monopoly digital companies like Amazon. Tim has a new book out. It's called The Age of Extraction. It's coming out in a couple of weeks. Tim, should this be a warning that half the internet's down because everything exists on Amazon Web Services?
Yes, I think it is. Centralized systems tend to be very fragile, and they offer great, advantages in some ways, but then when they crash, they tend to crash hard. And whether it's an economy, whether it's web services, yeah, I agree. I think we'll see more and more. In fact, we've already seen a lot of centralized crashes because of too much control in too few hands.
Oh, so you're already predicting a hard crash in today's AI boom? Hot, heavy AI boom. Can I interpret what you just said?
Do you mean a financial crash?
Well, some sort of crash. I mean, everyone's thinking about it. I'm sure you've given some thought to it too.
I think that there's a pattern you have with any kind of centralized system where they're almost like a stimulant. There's a high, there's a sense that you can do anything caused by the centralization of power or resources or whatever. And, that can be anything. It could be the US economy in the 20s. That can be, fascist government in the 30s, whatever it is, they go on this. And then there's a real disadvantage to centralized systems, whether it's web services, whether it's companies, whole economies, is that they're not very resilient. When they crash really hard. So I think we've taken some serious risks with the economy. I mean, it's already crashed a couple times. But our lesson keeps being, well, let's just like reinforce the system. And I would think we're in for a hard crash. I won't say a date, but coming at some point.
Interesting. And you've been pretty wise on this sort of stuff. You were last on the show in February. You had an interesting essay in Liberty's Quarterly on the real road to serfdom, built off a critique of Hayek. And you told me back then that you were finishing a book, The Age of Extraction, which very much takes some of the ideas you developed in The Real Road to Serfdom and builds it into a fuller argument. What does the age of extraction, Tim, mean? What's your point here?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I'm trying to think of, what is the moniker that describes our era? And I think economically, and particularly in the tech world, extraction, which is actually a word economists use to describe what a monopolist does when it has the power to do it, I think best suits it. I think we have entered a world, and I'll talk about the platforms, but even more generally, where we tolerate extreme levels of concentrated private power who try in every sort of way they can to extract from weaker entities as much as possible. And I mean, there's always been some of that, but I think it's become a science, whether it's the extraction of data from you, money through fees and higher prices when you kind of have someone's position, time, whatever it is. I think in many ways we and much of the economy have become a resource for extraction by economically powerful actors. So that I think defines our reality. And I'd say the tech platforms are the sort of ultimate expression of this ideology.
Shoshana Zuboff, of course, came out with a book a few years ago. She's been on the show a few times, Surveillance Capitalism. Is your book about what we might think of as platform capitalism, too?
Yes, it is. I think, in some ways, complementary. She was very focused on the business model of advertising and collection of data as a path. And I agree that that's significant, but I think it's spread much further beyond that business model. And I think platform capitalism isn't a bad moniker. One of the main points of the book is to describe the history of the platform, which frankly is a long history. It's almost as old as civilization, both, in its simplest form. When you think about an ancient Greek city square or something, or a Persian market, there's always been places where people do business. What has changed in our era is the idea that where people buy and sell or just go and do their things have become the most profitable and extractive businesses in our time. And I think that is the point of the book, is to kind of capture that form of market power and what it does.
Peter Thiel, of course, wrote his book Zero to One, suggesting that the whole business of, and he meant that literally and metaphorically, the whole business of an entrepreneur was to become a monopolist, because that would mean that they'd been completely successful. Do you agree with him? And would that mean then that all startups, particularly when it comes to the digital age, whether it's AI or social media or e-commerce, they're all seeking to become platforms? So in a sense, the fact that Amazon or Google or Apple are platforms reflects their own success.
Yeah, I mean, we in many ways we live, particularly in the tech world, we live in Peter Thiel's ideology. I think, if I were going to write a book about the change, in some ways, this book is about the changing ideology of Silicon Valley. Once it sort of glamorized small, inventive firms, Silicon Valley glamorized people who, brilliant scientists who gave their work to the public, like the inventors of the internet, for example, and
Tim
believe,
Berners-Lee.
yeah, as an example, or even Vint Cerf, he went to work
Right.
privately, but many of those inventions, many of the Stanford inventions they became the web or became the internet's protocols. Um, it valorized staying away from government, avoiding becoming a defense contractor, the way that the big companies like AT&T, and T, and it also, most of all, thought of monopoly as a horrible kind of thing. The monopoly, and think about the Apple ad in 1984, where that was the ideal of Silicon Valley, to work for a small, uh, active, sprightly kind of company, not some monster. So Peter Thiel, in that book, said that every company should aim for monopoly, and that's basically where we live today. And everyone wants to be the platform. Everyone wants to be in the position where they're able to extract from others as opposed to being extracted themselves. And I don't doubt that it has some merits, particularly in the short term as a business strategy. Whether it's actually good for the US economy and whether it's good for tech are much bigger questions. In fact, I think that the tech world is becoming what it once claimed to despise, a series of uh, people who are embedded to government, uh, help out authoritarian regimes, prey on and violate human rights, and are most of all just big hulking bureaucratic, you know, massive elephant of companies, or I guess juggernauts of companies. And that was the whole idea of Silicon Valley, was to not be that. So, in short, yes, Peter Thiel has won ideologically, but not in a way I think is healthy for the long term of Silicon Valley, the United States, or the world.
Yeah, I did tell you, didn't I?
I want to say you were right, and I think it should be said very, very distinctly that you got there first and deserve a lot of credit for seeing what was coming later.
So where are we now in October, on October 20th, Tim, when it comes to the balance of power? I did a speech a couple of weeks ago in Amsterdam on whether or not we could trust big tech. My research suggested that you put I don't know what it is, the seven or the 10 dominant tech companies together, and they're worth about $20 trillion, which is, I don't know, 20% of the entire global economy. Are those good numbers? Are we at a point where we've never been before in economic history?
Whether we've never been here in economic history is a harder question. Whether we're in a healthy situation is clear we are not. I think the situation most similar to now, and I claim no originality in this claim, is the late 19th century, early 20th century, when there was, once again, on the back of enormous, important technological inventions, a massive concentration of wealth and growth of inequality the world had never seen. Well, the sort of long-term consequences of that are short-term, where the short-term were this incredible explosion of wealth. Longer term, we had several world wars. We had the rise of anarchist, communist, and similar radical movements that were just so angry about the unfairness of their lives that they went crazy. And then the rise of the fascist movement with populists who were, claiming to give voice to the people who were denied by democratic government. So I think have been in a similar phase. As I said, I'm not the first person to claim this, but I think we're in a terrible place. I think that a lot of the dangers, polarization, and violence, which is happening, and I think will get worse, has to do underlyingly with a sense that the world's economy is very unfair right now.
How frustrated are you given your own career? You were quite senior within the Biden administration. You were brought in with Lena Khan and others to reform the system. Did you achieve anything? Did Biden achieve anything?
That is a haunting question. I was thinking lately about what we tried to do, and in some ways, what worked and what didn't work. So our whole idea, when you get back to the Biden administration, is we were going to prove that normal democratic government worked. You voted for this. We're not going to be crazy, and we're going to govern for the whole country. In other words, we're going to run an economic policy that is designed not to just distribute money to California and New York. And if you the challenge, and I look back at this, I think that strikes me as a noble undertaking. We were going to try to fight tribalism and convince people that the government works for them, that they voted for. The challenge, and at the risk of blaming others, which is always something people do out of government, is that it was very difficult to get the message out. So, I don't know how much money we threw at states like Indiana, Arizona. We built chip factories. We invested, trillions of dollars in infrastructure. We improved healthcare, mainly to the benefit of places like Mississippi and so forth. But the message that we wanted to send, which is, here's the government fighting for everybody and investing hard in the middle of the country, and a government that's going to, on my side of the ledger, break up big tech and fight monopoly and reduce your prices. It was hard to get this message across when you have, essentially an opposition media whose depiction of us and of Biden was, these guys hate you. They look down on you. What they want to do is give a lot of money to, illegal immigrants and give money. And, the reality became irrelevant to what we were trying to do. We were not aided by inflation and so forth. But what I'm trying to say is, I think what we did was good. I think the messaging of what we did was terrible. And we were determined not to fall into that trap. We were determined to do things differently, and it still happened to us, which shows there was something more systematic that was the challenge, having to do with the media environment.
Politics is a tricky business. There were some in Silicon Valley who were sympathetic. Reid Hoffman, of course, comes to mind. Maybe Mark Benioff of Salesforce, even though he seems to have changed his mind recently. But you also managed, not you personally, but the Biden administration seemed to manage to really anger people like Mark Andreessen, Elon Musk. Was that a strategic error? Are these guys so paranoid that whatever you did would have inevitably turned them into enemies?
I mean, we sort of had a choice. We could undertake a program that was designed to make the economy fairer, or we could continue to give them the free pass that they'd gotten for the last 15 years or so. I think there were sort of superficial messages, and in some ways diplomacy might have been better. But the underlying message, Mark Andreessen, I think, sort of thinks of himself as a sovereign that floats above the United States government. and the enforcement of ordinary laws on him is like an offense. Uh, the Clayton Act bans mergers to monopoly, and they didn't like their mergers being scrutinized or challenged, and return of the antitrust laws, for example. And so I don't know. I think they expected a level of immunity almost from government. They expected us to work for them against the European Union, among other things. And so I think it was destined, if we wanted to, hold to our idea of working for the people to redistribute prosperity, there was going to be a collision.
And of course, Peter Thiel claims to be the Antichrist of Silicon Valley, which was once a moniker I held for a while, but I think he's a better Antichrist. So these
I
people
think
are.
his claim is that we are, or his various candidates for the Antichrist. I've been listening to his tapes. It's a
Yeah, I
little
saw
bit.
that you X'd on him. Yeah, there's something slightly odd. I mean, is there you noted Andreessen thinks of himself as some sort of emperor. Is there an ancien regime quality to people like Thiel and Andreessen who are so deluded and so separated from reality that ultimately they're going to piss everybody off?
I mean, I think so. I think desire they desire to be treated like small, like kings of small countries. So they want a sort of immunity from ordinary laws. I think they want a certain, when they show up or say something, to be treated with kind of a diplomatic, full diplomatic service, usually reserved for head of state. And I'm very sensitive to, anything that isn't consistent with that vision. And I do think, I mean, I lived in Silicon Valley. I guess you're there, and it is every place is a bubble, but it is a place where I think there's just something that happens to you if no one, whether you're an autocrat or whether you're a, tech billionaire, if no one ever says no to you, that starts to become very bad for your character. And these people have not been humbled or had, frankly, if anyone tell them they can't do something for a very long time.
Do you have any hope in some of the younger entrepreneurs, Sam Altman in particular, who has written a lot of stuff and said a lot of different things? It seems like there are several Sam Altmans within Sam's
Yes.
body. I'm not quite sure what to make of him.
He's a very malleable figure. I reviewed both of the biographies of his, which were both excellent. He's a malleable figure. I will say that my sense of history, industrial history, tells me that it's very important that um, that the AI companies at some point turn on the tech platforms and become their rivals as opposed to their entrenchment. I mean, you asked earlier, are we in a place that we've never been before? And, in some ways, yes. But what uh, will be a real turning point is whether today's AI companies come to challenge the major tech platforms or simply come to reinforce them. Um, and if they reinforce them, if they ally, then it's basically nobody on the side of the average citizen or consumer or so forth. It's sort of an alliance of power, which I think is terrifying. I hope that Altman and others with ilk see it in their interest to try to, take the throne from some of these other companies because you know, it's kind of an Adam Smith sort of idea. I'm not sure it's a great public good, but I'd much rather have those companies fighting with each other than working together.
So, should we maybe trust some of the older companies who have been through this game before? I mean, Microsoft, of course, comes to mind, even Google. Do some of these companies grow up, or are they always self-interested, platform-seeking monopolists?
I
And when I say
think
grow up, maybe that's the wrong word. Maybe
well, there's
recognize.
some no, no, there's something to that. I remember I once at a cocktail party spoke with Bill Gates about I got him on the topic of the antitrust cases, which are my interest. Not immediately, but eventually. And he thought about it and he said, when I lost the case to the United States in I guess 2000, 99, 2000, he said, I'd really never lost anything before. And
Interesting.
it was a different experience. He said it kind of took me down a couple pegs. And he said he went into philanthropy about 5 years earlier than he would have, and that the whole thing was kind of a change for him. I mean, many of the figures in Silicon Valley, they have characteristics that are useful in some contexts, but not particularly mature. Um, wisdom wouldn't be the strong suit, and wisdom usually comes from defeat. So, should we trust the old companies? I don't know if I would say we trust this company or not trust this company. I think a process of maturation is important. I mean, IBM's another company that was once all powerful and, now is sort of like a kindly elder statesman that does a lot of important work, but isn't this sort of dangerous, hostile creature anymore. I think, speaking from the government's perspective, is the government always wants to set up a balance of power. It always wants to have the great powers um, at each other and trying to diminish each other's power. It also wants other forces like labor and other what John Kenneth Galbraith called countervailing powers at each other. So I think that's what the United States wants. Um, I can see why the powerful companies would all want to work together. I think in the long run, that'll be very bad for them and will, uh, either become at some point a very stagnant economy. When you look at a country like Japan, who everybody worked together all the time and there was no kind of competition or conflict, they tend to get quite stagnant, or it just gets so out of control that you have the real problem of revolution and uprisings.
What do you make of the Google antitrust case? Lots of interpretations. Were you disappointed, dissatisfied, pleased that there was an element of victory, that finally Google's been brought to the table, or at least inside the court?
I mean, I was happy with everything until the final remedy. In fact, it had some of the classic attributes of a certain kind of mind, often found in Washington, D.C., where you are very intelligent, completely understand the problem. It reminds me a little bit of my time in the Obama administration, where, as I said, we'd understand everything, um, calculate everything, display enormous erudition and intelligence, but when the time came, get kind of wimpy. And the judge, basically wimped out at the end, despite having described all the problems, described the problem of monopoly, basically described exactly how Google was holding on to its monopoly, but then a little said, well, but there's AI, and I'm just going to sort of bow out here a little bit, despite all those findings. So I was very disappointed in the remedy, and obviously, you don't really know the long-term effects of these things till 10 years later. I'll notice at the time in the 80s, there people thought the IBM case wasn't that important, but it did enough to IBM to allow its successor to rise, Microsoft and other companies, and Dell and a whole bunch of other companies. And the question is whether the process has helped keep a policeman at the elbow for Google to slow it down. I mean, among other things, we didn't, if Google could just perfectly follow Peter Thiel, had no restrictions, I think they would have bought OpenAI at some point and just said, all right, we're going to control everything, bought them like 8 years ago.
Or sue OpenAI.
Sue OpenAI, just tried to destroy them or something. And so, having the ground rules is important. But yeah, I got there was a very wimpy element to the
So
remedy.
you think if had they been forced to sell Chrome, it would have been a much more significant punishment?
I think so. I mean, yes, because I think it opens up distribution, makes it easier for Google's competitors to get in edgewise and sort of structurally scramble stuff around.
You're no longer in power. You're in the opposition. The age of extraction now sounds kind of intriguing in the Trump 2 age. Trump, like on so many fronts, seemed to say many different things about big tech. Sometimes he's a populist, sometimes he's anti-Silicon Valley, sometimes he seems to be in bed. Of course, he's has his own crypto plays. His family have crypto plays. He's the ultimate extractive figure. What do you make so far of Trump in terms of your age of extraction? Have we simply gone back to the pre-Biden period where big tech and Silicon Valley was completely uncontrolled and uncontrollable?
I think we have not had the reckoning yet, um, to know the answer to that. The Republican Party is quite hostile to the traditional tech platforms and their business model. They're threatened by them. Their economic interests are threatened by them. They've sort of tried to make themselves more conservative, but it's just not a popular set of companies. JD Vance, the vice president, has, risen in many of his ways on a populist anti-tech kind of mandate. So those forces are still there. Trump, meanwhile, as you said, has been sort of doing two things at once, at least notionally. He still has a very aggressive antitrust division. The Google case wasn't dropped. The Facebook case is still going. There's cases against Apple and Amazon. So if you were just, someone who just looked at legal filings, you'd say they're in full combat with these companies. On the other hand, as you said, he's very happy to take money from them, very happy to honor and, treat them as the heads of state, which they like to be treated as. And so that is just a total contradiction. And I'll say that Trump is outside his party. There's two areas where he's at odds with his parties. One is tech, at least for him individually. The other is the Epstein files. So obviously may have different reasons for both, but I do not know if we've seen the final reckoning. I don't know if he would actually drop the cases, so maybe he just wants to take their money, but then still retain his credibility with the MAGA base.
Well, that wouldn't be the first or the last time he's done that. What do you make of what many call, we've done some shows on it, his or his family's crypto grift? Is it, even for Trump, extraordinary? And is it the kind of thing that ultimately could bring him down or at least tarnish, have some impact, whereas everything he's done in the past doesn't seem to have any impact at all?
Well, I'd be curious if people have a theory about that, but no, I sort of see it as one and the same. I mean, it seems there's not a con that he hasn't gotten his fingers into, and if history's any guide, somehow a lot of other people will lose a lot of money, and then he'll somehow end up at the right minute leaving. Uh, among Trump's many amazing abilities is that ability to know when is the time to jump out of the plane that's about to crash. Um,
Yeah.
and and then everyone else gets scattered. So if history's any guide, there's going to be a lot of people left. Yet somehow, in almost religious fashion, they'll take that loss that they've suffered as part of their penance or something like that. It is really weird. I'm amazed people would buy that stuff, but I'm not the target market.
So back in 2017, I wrote a book called How to Fix the Future, addressing all these issues. Many books have been written on this thing. Yours is certainly not the first or the last in terms of the age of extraction. The book is presented as having very concrete and realistic fixes.
Mhm.
Is there anything new, Tim, in the book in terms of controlling the platforms? I mean, there's obviously regulation, there's moral responsibility on the part of entrepreneurs, there's citizen activism. What are you saying that's in any way different from so many of these books about addressing the monopolistic nature of big tech? I mean, you're a lawyer, so obviously you're particularly well versed in the law.
No, I think there is a difference to this. I think where we've been weak, frankly, is coming up with a sustainable, frankly, political philosophy that is designed to be against a monopoly state in the age of extraction. Now, in a way, this book is operating at two levels at once. There's the case study, basically, of the tech platforms and their rise to power, and certain legal remedies that should be undertaken for that. But what's, I think, different about this book, and I think um, what in some ways it's designed to do, is the tech platform is, in a way, a gateway to understanding a deeper need for a political theory or political philosophy or an economic vision that favors decentralized power and decentralized capitalism. I mean, you had mentioned the age to uh, the real road to serfdom, my other essay. What I'm trying to do in, whether successful or not, is breed and nurture a sustainable philosophy that after all these crashes, after this chaos, after this suffering, we can turn to and make the governing philosophy for Western democracies, for the future, and look back at this period and say, how do we let that happen again? We went crazy in the turn of the 20th century, crazy at the turn of the 21st century. What we need is, at some fundamental level, a system of distributed, decentralized powers, a sort of a separation of powers for the economy. And so I think that marks it. There's a lot, I don't want to put down other books, but I think my book has a depth that you won't find other places. And if you read it carefully, you will come ideally away converted to a different philosophy of thinking.
Do you borrow from some of the technological and philosophical ideas of Web3? I know you're interested in some of the church doctrines about decentralization. Is it
Yeah.
a practical guide? Is it a philosophical guide? What are you trying to do in Age of Extraction?
I think it's both. So this and other works, I want to bring back the lost alternatives to socialism and laissez-faire capitalism. I think that in the long and loud battle between communism and capitalism, we lost track of theories. Some of them, like distributism, which just were about decentralized property, ordoliberalism, and I guess any of the old theories of, I keep going back to it, decentralized markets and decentralized capitalism. Um, at the same time, uh, want to be clear from having experience and understanding the law, what exactly the laws would need to look like in order to change who prospers from this economy. And part of this, the antitrust program, which I spent a lot of my life on, part of it is a return to essential elements of common carriage and utility regulation. I mean, it may not be entirely, common carriage has been around since at least the 15th century, but the fact that it is an ancient remedy doesn't mean it's not important.
Yeah,
And
and
I,
everyone, most people will know you. You invented the term net neutrality, so you're very familiar in this space.
yeah, in a way, this is, in some ways, net neutrality is still my fundamental philosophy, is I think our major systems on which people do business need to be neutral and fair and give an opportunity for everyone in the economy. And the platforms, they're very effective, useful, great places to sell things, but they should be taking a lot less. Basically, we want Amazon Marketplace to be a lot more like the ancient Greek marketplace, or like or like the electric system, something that is a platform that everyone can build to. And that's the sort of underlying message of the book.
Are politicians beginning to get this? The Klein Thompson book, Abundance, I'm sure you're all too familiar with those guys and their argument has stimulated an interesting debate on the left. Mandami, of course, is influential. Are you confident that progressives, you're a man on the left, are finally beginning to understand that it's not business as usual and we need to fundamentally rethink these issues?
I think that what's extinguished, I think on the progressive, at least my progressive uh, part of the party, is the idea that we just let the monopolists and others make all the money they want, and then later we'll tax and redistribute. I think that philosophy, which sort of dominated the 90s, has shown itself to be a failure. And don't think I mean, the people who essentially advocate tolerance of unequal wealth with a theory of later taxation, I think are on the run, which is why, in particular, I think Mandami is successful. His uh, focus on he is more socialist than I am, and there's kind of I think a deserved set of questions as to what the public can do and what it can't do. But I do think if you look carefully at someone like Bernie Sanders, Bernie has drifted very far from what might be called socialism or communism. I think, if he was in the communist movement, in 100 years ago, he'd be denounced as a right-wing maniac or something, and maybe put on trial somewhere, because he basically is an advocate of a lot of private ownership, just less power in a few places. So I think having other alternatives failed. I think the time for basically either whether it's decentralized capitalism, distributism, I think it's there. Part of the reason I'm writing books like this, and I feel part of an anti-monopoly movement. Frankly, I think the anti-monopoly party, to the extent there is one, is a very popular one. And I think politicians listen to what seems to have some resonance.
Are there particular politicians who get it? Your book comes with a blurb from Amy Klobuchar. She says, a must-read book, a book for anyone who seeks to understand our digital economy. I hope you're educating her.
Mhm.
Are there particular politicians who are beginning to address these issues,
I
Tim?
mean, I think Elizabeth Warren has been here for a very long time.
Yeah,
I
but
give her
she's
credit.
not likely to run for national office.
Uh, you, uh, well, you never say never.
No.
There's really no age limit on things anymore. I think now I'm speaking of others in our anti-monopoly camp. I think that politicians are, there's a vacuum on the left. People are hungry for answers. They look at the Biden administration and see the anti-monopoly program as one of the most popular and bipartisan, and they look at Mondami's quality of life, and they're like, somewhere in here is something I can run on, and something in here is something I want. Politicians, in my experience, are consumers in the idea space, and they desperately want stuff that resonates. And you were saying, well, is there new or old? Sometimes old or trusted or things that were successful in U.S. history are very important. The anti-monopoly movement has deep roots, as old as the revolution itself. And I think we're an emergent and powerful wing inside the Democratic Party. Let me just put it that way. And I think that many of the candidates, I don't, like, what else are they going to do? They're going to run uh, as pure, let's let pure neoliberals. I don't think there's anyone running for that. And the progressive, the people in the middle, people like Chuck Schumer, kind of will also try to associate themselves with us, even if they don't carry it out. So that's where I think we are.
Let's end, Tim, where we began with the possibility of a crash. Do you think ultimately something serious has to happen, not just another correction, something very serious with this current economy, which is so dominated by platform capitalists of Silicon Valley? Something has to happen for people, Americans broadly outside Washington, D.C. and Cambridge, Mass. and San Francisco and Los Angeles and New York to finally get it.
I mean, the optimist in me says maybe we can just have sort of a gradual decay of the power in so few hands, and enough of these things come through that we manage to work our way out of where we are today. The more pessimistic vision of me knows that across the scope of history, the main, unfortunately, the main and most effective tool of fundamental redistribution and change has been the world wars and major revolutions. So I'm not prescribing them. I'm not saying they're a good idea. I'm just saying if you want to look carefully at what has truly redistributed economic power, it's that. I think in a sense we're being tested. If we can't find some way to redistribute
Mm.
economic power, I think that history will redistribute it for us.
Who's testing us?
I guess God. I don't know. The father history, in a sense. Father
No.
history is testing us. Uh,
Interesting. The Age, Tim Wu's new book, The Age of Extraction, How Tech Platforms Conquered the Economy and Threaten Our Future Prosperity. It's out on November the 4th. As always, Tim, really honor to have you on the show. I'll have to get you back. Still so much more to talk about. Thank you so much.
it's always a great time here and thought-provoking. Thanks so much.